Yep.
Okay. Okay, so we've discussed a number of things, including the concept of marketing, the core marketing strategies, and also consumer behavior and marketing research. All right, and tonight our focus is to discuss product decision, right? And so a number of things about product that we try to discuss, and in doing so, I'd like to try to show the link between our core strategy in marketing and marketing mix variables, right? So starting from tonight, we are going to discuss marketing mix variables. Okay. Okay, so if I use examples, so they're just meant to be, for discussion materials only, as discussed before. Okay, and this topic is basically about product decision mainly, but I'll try to show, to discuss as well innovation, creativity, and also entrepreneurship in a nutshell, to show the link between the entrepreneurship and also what we do in driving the company's marketing mix variables, in establishing the company's marketing mix variables. Okay, now these three concepts, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, are basically interrelated one to another. Okay, we discussed that entrepreneurship is the risk-taking behavior. So entrepreneurs are basically trying to grow the business through finding the ideas that can meet the customers' need better. Okay, and let's have a look at this topic. Okay, now this is what we mean by innovation. It comes from Latin word in innovare, that means to make something new. Okay, so in business, what we mean is actually the successful exploitation of new ideas. Okay, so the successful exploitation or the successful implementation of new ideas. Okay, so when we say successful, successful new ideas, basically we talk about product, service, or process. In other words, it is the successful translation from ideas into new product, new service, new process. Okay, now that's basically one of the key points I'd like to highlight in here when it comes to the word innovation, innovare. Okay, and here we also say entrepreneurship is the powerful mixture of energy, vision, passion, and so on and so forth. So if you look at that, if idea is the key point, so it has to be based on something. Okay, and we will find it hard to get ideas if we don't have knowledge. Okay, so the keyword that drives us to get the ideas basically revolves around the knowledge, right? So we have to have knowledge so that we can generate ideas. Okay, now the other authors also suggest that innovation is actually the ideas that can be commercialized. Okay, so in other words, if we have ideas, okay, if we only have ideas, but we can't translate it into specific things such as product, service, or process that creates value for the organization and also the customers, then we don't have innovation. Okay, therefore, these scholars actually suggest that to use the word product. Okay, so the word multiply, ideas times commercialized, not plus. Okay, so we have to have something that we can add value. Right? If you look at that, actually the term commercialized in here refers to whether we can create value or not. Right? So yeah. All right. So in other words, if we only have if we only know how to commercialize it, but we don't have the idea, well, we don't have innovation. right? In other words, so both factors must exist in the context of innovation. Okay. All right. Now, Peter Drucker, one of the management scholars, also suggests that it is the specific tool of entrepreneurs. Okay, it is specific tools of entrepreneurs, right? So we discussed some time ago that the economic growth is actually in capitalism system is actually driven by the entrepreneurs, and when how do they do that? Well, innovation is actually the toolbox that the entrepreneurs have. Okay, so how do they do that? From concept perspective, we actually say the entrepreneurs drive the economic growth through what we call as the creative destruction. Okay, so that's what we call creative destruction. What does it mean? Well, simply creative destruction is we replace the old practices with the new one, because the new one creates better value for everybody, including the customers and also the organization. Okay, so simply we destroy the old practices and replace it with the new one. Okay, now you may recall that let's say I think 10-15 years ago, mobile device Nokia was the market leader in mobile phone category with 65% market share with Symbian technology at that time. People were happy with the simple with its simplicity in terms of connecting people. It's easy to navigate and so on and so forth. And then RIM BlackBerry launched their smartphone, and iPhone, Apple through iPhone launched smartphone category as well. And then Android system came into the industry, offering a better connection in terms of making people more connected. Okay, we can browse, we can do Facebook. Well, people may feel today's generation may find it boring if our mobile device does not allow us to connect to internet or Facebook or music, making photos and so on and so forth, right? So they actually replaced the previous one with the new one that is creating better value for the customers mainly. For the customers. Okay, so that's what we mean by creative destruction, right? So innovators basically work in that along that line. They replace the old practice with the new one that creates better value for customers, right? Which is basically in line with marketing concepts since week one that we discussed about marketing concepts. Okay. Right, so that's innovation, which is basically the toolbox of the entrepreneurs in terms of driving the economic growth. Okay, now the other thing I'd like to highlight is basically briefly about the 6 aspects of innovation. The first one is identifying or creating opportunities. We can also get the new ways of serving existing markets, growing new markets, rethink the services that we offer, meeting social needs, or improve the operation. So there are the aspects of innovation that that organization may consider. Now, types of innovation. Briefly, there are 2 types of innovation: radical innovation, or some other scholars also say that this is disruptive innovation. Okay. So if you find the concept disruptive innovation, it is actually a radical innovation. The other one is incremental innovation. Okay, radical innovation basically focuses on bringing new things, significant changes, right? So when radical innovation is introduced, both the customers and also the organizations will need to do radical changes internally, significant changes. Okay, so for instance, the internet is an example of a radical innovation. When internet is introduced, the way we communicate has changed significantly. All right, in Australia Post, for instance, must remodel their business concept, the way they do business. from delivering posts, mails from one customer to the customers, and so on and so forth. And they changed their business model more into supporting e-commerce through, they expect e-commerce would grow significantly in markets like Australia. And they are correct, because their business from selling stamps for those who want to send mails would drop. But at the same time, with the internet, people may have more opportunities in terms of entering business. Okay, and the next one is incremental innovation. Incremental innovation is basically focusing on the existing product or existing service. They just make it better, right? They just find the improvements to make it better, right? So, for instance, iPhone 6 to 7 or iPhone 7 to 8 and iPhone 8 to iPhone 10. That's basically an improvement of the current product, of the current offering for the customers. Okay, so that's incremental innovation. Now, both types of innovation, basically, in my observation, companies would normally consider both types of innovations, both incremental and radical. In terms of return, the radical innovation may generate higher revenue. At the same time, it also attracts higher risk. So if they if they fail with this innovation, well, it is painful. But if they're successful, it will be fantastic for them, right? It will be fantastic. They will gain high return. You can imagine that iPhone is one of the product that has been considered as revolutionized the way we communicate, the way we use mobile device. And in the case of incremental, the return is not as high as radical, as well as and it is also comparable to the level of risk of incremental innovation. Now, in real life, companies also need to consider incremental innovation, because incremental innovation helps the company to create or build the customer loyalty. Okay, they keep the connection, they maintain the connection with the customers. Hey, I'm still here. I'm still here. See, I'm bringing new things. I'm bringing new updates for you, and so on and so forth. Right. Whilst the radical innovation is basically expected to drive their business growth further. Okay. And the other one that I'd like to discuss briefly is General Electric innovation. These guys actually conducted what people call as the disruptive innovation. I believe you can still find, if you type in the Google search box how GE is disrupting itself. The article is actually available. It was published by Harvard Business Review, and I think the article is now available as well. So you may be able to download it. Okay. So disrupting in here, the way GE disrupt in here, according to this article, is basically about the way they do business. Normally, in international market, we start with the developed economies. In this instance, if the company is based in America, they will develop the product in America, and they will ship the products to developing economies. Okay, there are two major assumptions in here, right? The first assumption is basically about the way economy is developed is the same as Western's economy, right? Starting from poverty, and then industrialized, and then mass consumption, and so on and so forth, right? And the second assumption is that the product that the product that is developed in developing economies will not work in developed economies, right? So if we have the so-called third world countries developing these products, it will not work in the developed economies, right? Because they argue that it is not as sophisticated as it is in developed economies, right? Now GE proved that it is not. These two big assumptions are not correct. Okay, in India, for instance, they developed the EKG machine, and in India and China with the USG and EKG machine, these two machines in America is quite expensive as well, and so the hospitals in China and India could not afford to buy these machines. So the local R&D team developed smaller size of machine, right? And it fits in, especially if you look at Indian market, for instance. The medical service is normally available in the large cities. Okay, so people need to travel a lot, right? In China, for instance, when people need to have surgery, they may need to travel, spend at least 7 days to do the surgery, travel, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the smaller machine really works for them in terms of price because they can afford it. And the second reason is that in India, the Indian government actually developed what they call as mobile hospital. So they changed one of the coach of the train to be a kind of clinic, and it can do simple surgeries, including cataract, and also conduct the USG tests, for instance, right? And that train travels from one city to another city with that small device, okay? So that's a concept that has been developed in India and China, all right? And then GE challenged themselves, what about if we launch it in America, the home country of this business? And they launch it, and it is also successful because it meets different types of needs of the hospital, which is basically more, effective way. They may not need 100% of the features, whilst they probably need, simple things with the device. Okay, right. So that's what we call as the reverse innovation. That's what they call as the reverse innovation, and actually, it is the part of the disruptive innovation that GE introduced to us in terms of changing the way they think, changing the way they look at they run the business. Okay. Sources of innovation. There's several sources of innovation, as Peter Drucker suggests. The first one is unexpected occurrences. In this instance, the market is a major source to look for opportunities, but unexpected occurrences actually is about the innovation. The idea is generated accidentally. All right, some innovation maybe by accident they got it. Like Alexander Fleming, for instance, developed the penicillin, and he found that it kills bacteria. So that, they thought, why don't we commercialize it? So there you go. That's an unexpected occurrences. Yeah. So it's kind of lucky strike. Now the next one is incongruities, right? Which is basically finding the need gap. Okay, if you like, finding the gap in the market. Okay, finding the gap between what is offered and what should be. Okay, a lot of businesses actually start with that, understanding the gap, where the gaps are, right? And actually, from marketing perspective, it is our role to find the gap and fill the gap with what we can offer. Okay. Process needs is another one. Identify the company's weak spots to correct and redesign. So look at the process from A to Z until the product is developed, and after that we find the weak spots. Right. In the olden days, the cataract surgery apparently requires certain enzyme, and in the olden days, it took ages to create this enzyme through fermentation process. And scientists in Germany could create the shortcut to do it, right? So they could simplify the process. Okay. Industry and market structure changes is another one. Sometimes the regulation might happen. So like the one in Australia some time ago with John Howard, for instance, deregulated the airline industry. So it changed the market structure. It changed the industry. Yeah. And the next one is demographic changes, the population, changes in population, income levels, human capital, lifestyle, and so on and so forth. They may bring us the opportunities as well. Perceptual changes, and the other one is new knowledge that people develop. Either private companies and also universities, they may do research to develop new knowledge, and we use this new knowledge for us to develop further. Okay. Right, so there's sources of opportunities. Now, so when we think about innovation, we may generate ideas, a number of ideas, okay? And when we work in new product development projects, for instance, we may generate new ideas, lots of ideas, okay? The challenge for us is to select which ideas that we want to focus on, okay? Why is that? Why do we need to select them? Well, at least there are two reasons. The first one is not all ideas are workable. The second one is we have limited resources. So although all of them are winning ideas, then we have the limited resources to support them. Okay. Therefore, to screen which ideas that we want to focus on, there are three opportunities. There are three things that we need to ask ourselves. First, the product feasibility, whether we can make it. Right. This one here is actually about whether we can make it or not. Can we make it? Okay. Well, sometimes it may be our dream that talks about, and we need to ensure that our dream is actually workable. The second one is about market feasibility, which is basically about, is there anybody buying this product, buying this innovation? Okay, so do we have the market in here? So this is about the question about, do we have market in here? Okay. And the third one is actually about economic feasibility, whether the cost is actually something that we can work out. Okay, so this one here is actually about the profitability of the idea. Okay, so if you look at those, if you look at these three screening criteria, the first one is actually about from technical aspect. Okay, so this is about technical aspect, whether we can make the product or not, okay? And that is actually about the ease of implementation, if you like. Ease of implementation. Can we make it or not? Well, probably it is not a simple yes-no question. It is also about whether how difficult it is, right? In my experience working with in the corporate life, the team also in many cases they also come back to us saying, okay, well, it is a matter of degree of how much effort that we want to put in. That means that reflects the whether it is easy or not. Okay. Now the last two are basically related to impact to business. Okay, so if we combine these two, right, ease of implementation and impact to business, we can get a 2x2 matrix basically. Okay, so if we draw that a little bit here, we may come up with something like that. Well, pardon my rectangle, and yeah, so let's say this one here is about impact to business, and the other one is about if this is the ease of implementation, and the other one is, let's say, about impact to business. Okay, and we can map them whether this will be kind of low, high. Okay. And the other one is low, high. Okay, so we can map the IDs using this kind of matrix basically to help us understanding which one that we want to focus on. Okay, so obviously the products in the IDs that falls in this category would be the one that we want to focus on. They are easy to make, and they will bring high impact to business as well, based on our research. Customers want it, and based on our research as well, it will be profitable as well. It adds value to customers. Customers want it, and the customers also are also willing to pay. Okay, and these guys are basically something that we low in terms of impacts, quite low, and it is also hassling for us to make, as you know. And you can make decision about this area here, right? There may be something that you may want to still work out. So, for instance, this guy, he is basically bringing high impact to business, but they're difficult to make. So you may want to park the ID until you get the resources, and you may need to make decision about when you will have the capabilities to make it happen. Okay. Now this one is basic. The other one is basically about the other question mark in here is actually about whether you want to keep, maintain a connection with the customers because you launch something very quick. Okay, the impact may not be that high, but you help building the connection with the customers through launching new varieties, for instance. Okay. All right, so hopefully that gives us a bit of ideas in terms of screening the opportunities, product feasibility, market feasibility, and economic feasibility. Okay. The next thing is the creativity. Okay. Now, creativity is actually defined as the production or generation of new and useful ideas. Okay. Why useful ideas? Well, it has to solve customers' problem. All right, it has to solve problem like customers' problem. All right, otherwise it is not useful for us. Why we bother thinking about this idea? Okay, so that's the reason why we say it has to be useful. Okay, new because we expect something, a fresh look at the problem, for instance. Okay, so if you look at that, very closely related to innovation because creativity is about ID. Innovation is also about ID. Okay. And entrepreneurship basically works on based on these two as well, creativity and innovation. Okay, so how are they linked? How are the three of them linked? Well, at creativity level, we say the ID, which is basically based on knowledge, is at raw level. Okay, at creativity level, we say the ID is at raw level. It is still raw. Okay. And then at innovation level, we say we refine the ID, right? Yes, we got the ID. That means we have the creativity stage. We are at the creativity stage, right? And we refine the ID to translate the ID into product or service. Then we actually refining them, all right? We refine the knowledge that we have, okay? And the next one is at entrepreneurship. At entrepreneurship level, we actually commercialize it. We commercialize the knowledge, right? So here, the knowledge is still at raw, okay, level. It is still raw knowledge that we have, just ID that we have. This one here, we translate the knowledge into something, into products, okay, at innovation level. At entrepreneurship level, we commercialize it. We create value, right? We make it happen. We create value for both customers and also the company, okay? All right, so I'm not going to discuss this these techniques in here. Just number of techniques that people use, including attribute listing, including the brainstorming, and also mind mapping. Basically, there are some of the techniques that people use in terms of techniques. Okay, so there you go. That's the one that we just discussed before in terms of the link between creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Okay. Right. Any questions so far, Hans?
No, all good.
All good. Right. Is that in line with the organizations that you're in, basically?
Yes. Yeah. I would say we're not overly entrepreneurial at this point in time.
Right. Right. Fair enough. All right. Now, let's move on to the product decision, which is basically the first P in our marketing mix variables. In saying that, when I say the first P in our marketing mix variable, I should also say in retail marketing, the placements may become the first P because a placement or location of the business in retail industry is probably the game changer. we may have mediocre product, but if the location is perfect, well, it is a game changer. Customers will come, right? Now let's look at, well, in general, let's look at the product first, and then we talk about the placements in the next session. Okay. Right, now in module 2, we discuss about a number of things, including strategic marketing. And one of the key concepts that we discuss is positioning, which is defined as the how the product is defined by customers based on its important attributes. How do we develop positioning strategy? Well, the first step that we need to do is to create a positioning map. All right. Look, I'm just taking this opportunity to give a bit of heads up that in our second assessment we need to create a marketing plan. So one of the key components in marketing strategy. So the concept positioning is key for us to understand. Okay. So we establish the positioning map. How do we get there? We need to determine the attributes. Okay, we need to determine the attributes. All right, what are the key points, the key features that customers want? Okay, now if you look at this diagram, it is actually showing a simple diagram of a positioning map. Okay, why simple? Because we only have 2 attributes. Okay, in real life we may have multiple attributes. Right, we may have some attributes that includes energy, for instance, that includes modern, for instance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's say if I draw another line somewhere, okay, I'll get another angle. Okay, let's say this is the positioning map in soft drink industry, in our market. All right, so we have social acceptability, and the other one is sweetness. Right, and if we haven't launched a new brand like Solo, for instance, it is an opportunity for us where do we want to position ourselves. Right, if we say we want to be perceived as high in terms of social acceptability, then we'll be competing with a global brand, Coke. And if we say that we want to be perceived as being sweet, then we'll be competing with Pepsi. Okay, so probably the best one is to find a unique spot. Is basically low in terms of social acceptability and low in terms of sweetness. Okay, so that's positioning map basically. And the next thing that we need to do is to, based on that positioning map, is to develop a positioning statement. Now, positioning statement is again a statement that summarizes company or brand positioning. How do we write it? Okay, how do we write it? This is how we write it. All right, to what target market or to whom you're what. Okay, this is the formula to write a positioning statement. Okay, to whom you're what. So it's probably similar to a job interview. In the job interview, the interviewer may ask us, "Tell me about yourself." Then we need to find the right thing to pitch ourselves for that role. Okay, to this future employer, I'm what. Okay, so similar to our brand as well. Okay, so we need to create one for our brand. Okay, now this positioning strategy is actually at we are going to convey this positioning strategy for our consumer's mind. All right, so that it may sound a bit abstract. Therefore, we need to help our customers to understand it. Right. At the same time, we also need to show that we can deliver it. Right. The positioning strategy that we develop is basically a promise that we want to convey for the customers. Okay. How do we deliver it? Well, we need to create marketing mix. In other words, the marketing mix variables should support the positioning strategy that we want to convey for the customers. All right, because the positioning strategy is actually the promise that we want to convey for the customers. Okay, as we discussed in the previous module, in module 2, positioning is probably a trade-off, right? It is the promise that we want to convey for the customers, and it is also the promise that the other thing that we do not want to convey for the customers. If we say that our brand is premium, so we promise to deliver premium, top-level things for the customers, right? Luxurious things for the customers in terms of brand, in terms of service, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we also say, we also tell the customers, hey, this is a trade-off that you are making, right? what is the trade-off? We are not cheap, for instance, right? We are not cheap, right? So if you come to us, you need to be ready that because we do not promise to you that it will be cheap. We promise to you we deliver the premium one for you, okay? The problem is if we mix up, right? We promise to deliver something premium, but our marketing variables don't deliver that. That is a problem, okay? All right, so hopefully that gives us a bit of illustration in terms of positioning and marketing variables. Okay. Now, if we look at a bit of industry in Australia, such as Aldi, is Aldi also available in your market hunts?
No, no.
Okay, okay. It's a German. It's a German brand actually in retail industry. So they are competing with Woolworths and Coles. And the interesting about Aldi is basically it fights on value, right? If you look at their campaign, Aldi's campaign, they always say we are cheaper than that. Okay, we are cheaper, more affordable, if you like. So they keep saying about affordability. Okay, so one of the campaigns shows the toast, for instance. Their toast is $2 only, and we can imagine that if you go to buy national brand at Woolworths and Coles, you may need to spend $4 or $5 for a loaf of toast. But at Aldi, they say it's $2, so it is still fill you up as a toast, right? The wrapper, for instance, the aluminum wrapper, for instance, they compare in their advertising campaign. The national brand is more than $6, but they're selling at about $2 only, all right, which is quite cheap. Okay, so from there, again, we discussed some time ago that the core strategy of when it comes to marketing strategy, it includes what we call target market, positioning, as we just discussed. Oops, typing error, and marketing mix variables. Okay, so they are what we call as the marketing strategy. All right. So if we go back to Aldi, the target market is based on what they are offering, based on their campaign. We could argue that the target market is those who who are budget conscious, right, or bargain hunters. Okay. They are not necessarily the poor guys, basically, because people may also turn out to be aware, hey, why do I want to spend that much? Okay, similar to Virgin Airlines when they just launched in Australia, their message to customers is pretty simple. If you can if you can fly from Sydney to Melbourne and you spend less than $100, why do you have to spend $120 flying Qantas, for instance? Okay, so that's the target market. So what is the positioning? Well, to the bargain hunter, possible positioning for this brand would be to the bargain hunter, we are affordable. Okay, we offer affordability, or we save your money, and so on and so forth. Now, what about the marketing mix variables, right? The marketing mix variables should support it, right? If you happen to visit, if you happen to visit their website, you'll find that in Australia, from product perspective, they have limited range. Okay, now that limited range is important for this kind of business because they don't need large property size. Okay, compared to Woolworths and Coles, since they offer national brand and more varieties, they have to have large size of store, right? That remember, the promise is affordability, right? So they need to be able to manage it. Otherwise, they will not be able to fulfill their promise. Okay, that's from product perspective. The other thing from product perspective is, aside from limited range, they also offer no bags. Right, they are not going to provide the customers with plastic bag. All right, so customers need to bring their own bag, or otherwise they're going to charge. Okay, or otherwise the customers will bring something without the bag. Okay, from price perspective, affordable. From placement perspective, again, as we discussed before, the size of the store is basically not that large because they only offer the main products. Okay. And from promotion perspective, they support the affordability. Okay, and recently they just launched a new campaign showing we don't have a lot of range, so that is a benefit for the customers because the customers can find the products easily. Okay, right. So basically, hopefully that gives you a bit of illustration in terms of showing the link between positioning and the marketing mix variables. Right now, can we? Hans, can I suggest that we stop for a moment because and we come back to the meeting, the virtual meeting room by clicking the same link because I think I'm approaching 40 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.